Oh, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting, Tuesday 5th of March at Mallacoota Golf and Country Club in Mallacoota. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting to enhance the accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing the council will have their image, comments or submissions recorded. Please ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. On behalf of council, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. And thank you for having us here in Mallacoota, the first time a meeting has been held here since 1997. We've added Mallacoota to the list this year due to the success for taking council meetings outside the corporate centre last year. It's a great opportunity for us councillors and staff to meet with interested community members, which we've had gatherings in Genoa last night at the service centre, the business breakfast this morning and a couple of on-site visits this morning. So thanks to those who have attended these functions, and we welcome you here this afternoon. I'd also like to acknowledge former Councillor Dale Fisher in the gallery, students from Mallacoota P12 Legal Studies years 10 and 11 and their teacher Mr Dunn, and also our East Gippsland Citizen of the Year Miss June Drake. So thank you. Item 1.2, apologies Mr CEO.
I have none, Madam Mayor.
Item 1.3, declaration of conflict of interest, Mr CEO.
None have been submitted, Madam Mayor.
Item 1.4, confirmation of minutes, that the minutes of the Ordinary Council meeting held on Tuesday 5th February 2019 be confirmed.
I'm happy to move that.
Thanks, Councillor Rotino and Councillor Reeves. All those in favour? This motion carried. 1.5, next meeting. Ordinary Council meeting Tuesday 9th of April 2019 to be held at the Corporate Centre, 273 Main Street, Bairnsdale, commencing at 6 p.m. 1.6, requests for leave of absence. Mr CEO.
None have been received, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. 1.7 is public question time. So I've got a number of questions to get through, so I'll just ask those who have submitted to come forward and ask their question. So first is Miss Rosemary Martin.
Okay, I have two questions, one of which I think has been answered on the website, but I'll read it anyway. Given the current crisis facing the recycling industry and local councils in Victoria, is recycled material collected in East Gippsland currently going to landfill or being sorted and recycled? Once recycled material is sorted in Bairnsdale, where is it ending up?
Thank you, and yes indeed this is a very topical issue, so it is one that we issued a media release which is on our website last week, reassuring the community that our recycling is indeed still being recycled and it is not going to landfill. There has been a lot of media attention around what's happened with one of the recycling companies operating out of Melbourne and Geelong. That is not the company that we use. So therefore our recycling is uninterrupted by the current events that are going on. At present our recycling is collected through our curbside collection through the company that we use for that. It is firstly sorted in Bairnsdale, and then that sorted recycling goes down to a recycling service in Melbourne where it is further recycled and processed. I'd encourage the community to look at, there's a really good YouTube video by Visi. It's called, if you search under Visi Recycling, you will see it. That shows not only the process that recycling goes through, but also what we can recycle and what happens to those products and how they're processed through the system. So our recycling is very much still being recycled and reused. We would encourage our community to continue to use this really important service, because it's really important that we continue to keep as much of our waste out of landfill as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My other question relates to the same topic. The Friends of Mallacoota has funded and managed a collection system for household batteries and light globes and fluorescent tubes for many years. In the absence of suitable toxic waste collection services to small towns, members have to transport this material to Bairnsdale themselves. Could Council implement a collection service suitable for small and remote communities to remove toxic materials from our townships?
Ms Weigel.
Thank you. Look, can I firstly commend your community group for the actions that you're taking to collect batteries and fluorescents. It's really important that we try and keep those out of our landfill system. You're correct, at this point in time, Council offers a program through Bairnsdale, through our Detox Your Home program, which is the only service that we're currently running because of some of the challenges around logistics of offering that to small communities and remote communities. However, we'd be very happy to work with you to work out how we can collect those that are already being collected. If there's a central point in Mallacoota, we'd be very happy to work with you about how we can transport that down to Bairnsdale and manage it through that Detox Your Home program.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Martin. Mr Kieran Martin.
Following a number of incidents over summer, Council recently indicated in a letter to the Friends of Mallacoota that existing staff permanently stationed in Mallacoota may be utilised to undertake the duties of community laws officers. Would such staff be authorised to impound dangerous or stray animals, impose fines and carry out all duties of such an officer, and be available at weekends and also after hours for emergency situations? Would their training be equal to community laws officers?
Thank you, Mr Holton.
Thank you very much for your question. You're right, we are considering authorising some existing staff in Mallacoota to undertake duties in line with community laws officers. In terms of being able to impound animals and the like, it's very difficult because we don't have those facilities located in Mallacoota at present. We would see that training is an important part of authorising any officers to undertake those duties, because those duties aren't straightforward or simple, and it can be seen as a frontline public relations role as much as an authorising and an enforcement role. So the short answer to your question is I don't believe at this stage they would have the capacity to fulfil the entire functions of a local laws or a community laws officer, but they would have the capacity to fulfil a limited scope, and certainly we are currently looking at it, but we haven't made any hard and fast decisions at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Martin. Mr Neil Gregg.
Sorry, got the wrong question to start with. I've got two sets of questions. Mallacoota is surrounded by a World Heritage listed biodiversity region. Should the Shire introduce a charge for disposal of green waste, as has been mooted, how will it ensure that illegal dumping in bushland and the resulting weed invasions do not compromise the integrity of our environment?
Thank you. Ms Weigel.
Thank you for your question. It's indeed an important issue. Illegal dumping is very much a societal issue that is unfortunately been occurring for a long time, and prior to us introducing green waste charges, so it's not necessarily linked. However, our local laws and our waste unit are working together with DELP as well to combat this very issue, because we recognise the importance of it. In the past, several notices have been served to many residents, including some business operators here in Mallacoota. We do have a local law that specifically regards littering around vegetation dumping, but enforcement can be a little difficult in situations where the waste is dumped unless we've got very clear evidence of that occurring. Council, I guess, would require community support to help us identify where that dumping was occurring and to manage some of that infringement process. Your question was also around the link between the green waste charges. I think regardless of whether there's a link between charging for green waste or not, if council makes any changes to its green waste collection and management, this would be accompanied by an extensive community education program that would address many issues, including illegal dumping. I can't comment on any future changes to our green waste charges because that's really a decision of council that has yet to be made. However, in the past, when council did have a charge for our green waste collection, it was accompanied by several amnesty weekends, especially around that build up to the fire season, where residents could bring in their green waste at no charge to make sure that people still had the ability to manage their properties and become fire prepared.
Thank you for that one. Keeping food waste out of landfill should be a priority. To this end, Mallacoota residents have supported the very efficient kitchen to compost program. It's been a great success for the residents. What plans does the Shire have to expand this system to include food waste from caravan parks and the food handling businesses? Also, what steps are being taken to ensure that green waste is not contaminated with industrial materials such as plastics, treated pine and asbestos?
Thank you. Another topical and really good question. You're quite correct, and we acknowledge and understand that food waste makes up about 60% of our total waste that's going into our red lid bins and then into landfill. So we have the intent of trying to divert as much food waste as we can from landfill, and we're looking at working on the processes that we introduced as a pilot here in Mallacoota to make them even more sustainable and explore technology and systems and associated end uses that make sure that we're not only diverting it from landfill but creating a really good end use product. The Kitchen to Compost program has been a great success in Mallacoota since it was introduced as a pilot some years ago. However, it does cost us approximately $100,000 per annum to operate this pilot project or this project. So we're really looking at how we can streamline that and find an end use for that, that compost and that waste before we look at introducing it to caravan parks and expanding it out any further. As you've quite rightly identified, one of the core things is to making sure that it's a good product and has an end use, is making sure that there are no contaminants in there. So that will be a continuing focus of our waste education program, that people understand what they can and can't put into the compost bin that goes into the Kitchen to Compost program. So we keep those materials that you identified out of the program. Thank you.
Councillor Buckley just had a question for Ms. Wagner.
Has anybody around this table or in this room even got any idea of what percentage of our waste is food waste? I've heard varying figures from 43% down, but that 43% sounds outrageous to me. That couldn't be right, could it?
We actually undertake audits of periodic audits of our bins, and based on that, we believe that it's as high as 60% of the waste that goes into our red bins, based on those audits.
Surely somebody must be able to come up with something to do with all that, you know, to divert it to compost or something like that, surely.
And that's exactly what the Mallacoota trial has been around. The kitchen to compost has been exactly around that. We want to trial it, make sure it works, get a really good end product, and then we can look at it rolling it out for other communities as well. I believe it was recognised with an award some years ago as being so innovative. It's been a great partnership with the community, and one we look forward to continuing not just here but in other communities as well, because as you said, Councillor Buckley, very important that we are diverting that waste from landfill.
Yeah, well, I've converted it into a compost many times in a different fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. The next question will be read by the CEO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Reading a question at the request of Jeanette Orry. Is Jeanette in the... Oh, my apologies. So you are here. That's great. Thank you. Mallacoota Skate Park Committee would like to know how to get the upgrade plans up and going. And I would refer this to Ms. Nelson.
Thank you. Look, the Mallacoota community has been very proactive in advising council about the priority that they see for the renewal of the skate park, upgrading it over quite a number of years. The Recreation Reserve Master Plan includes an upgraded skate park as the 6th priority in that plan. So it isn't a priority that council has budgeted for at this time. But certainly something that council does recognise. It's obviously at the moment council's priority is working on the sporting pavilion as part of the recreation reserve. This project to upgrade the skate park would be something that would come as a future project. And in correspondence that we've had with the community and with the Committee of Management and Ms Aubrey, we really encourage them to work through the Committee of Management to work with us to start to look at programming that in future capital budgets. We're aware that the community was proactive late last year with the Victorian Government's Pick My Project, and I thought that was potentially a really great opportunity for funding to be received, but unfortunately only 2 projects in East Gippsland actually were funded through that process. So we're certainly happy to work with the community to understand what funding opportunities might be and how the community might be best positioned to receive funding. But the fact that it's in the Recreation Reserve Master Plan is one of the best things that can happen. So happy to continue the conversation.
Thanks, Ms Nelson. Mr Martin Hiley.
Thank you. Will the council consider employing a part-time community engagement officer located in Mallacoota to engage with the community on Shire issues such as communicating council's plans and policies, obtaining data and reporting to council on community priorities, educating the community and visitors on waste management practices, and accessing the town on foot, such as moving around Mallacoota on footpaths, roads and crossings?
Thank you. Ms Nelson?
Thank you. Look, it's a really interesting question and one that council is in the process of exploring, not specifically a role like this, but understanding how we do actually work with a more place-focused approach to the way that council does its business in communities. While we haven't anticipated an officer such as this, because in many cases what we'd like is that the community and council interact on a range of issues that you know might be quite specialist, so we would prefer there's broad interaction with the organisation. We are exploring at the moment in a number of communities the development of place plans and community plans, which gives us then a much better structure for how we do actually interact with the community. And had a conversation with a number of people last night about whether that's something that Mallacoota as a community as a whole might like to discuss further with us. So I'd be happy to. I think someone was going to send me some information about what's been progressed already by community organisations here. So that may be something that leads to council understanding how best to position ourselves to deliver services and interact with the community based on the need that's identified into the future. So once again, it's a conversation that I'd be happy to have. Yeah.
Thank you. My second question is, the costs of waste disposal to the Shire are increasing. Will Council investigate auditing a percentage of waste bins and then inform the audited ratepayers about their household waste and the ways they might reduce it?
Ms Weigel.
Thank you, Martin. Another great waste question. Council does undertake periodic audits of our bins, and that's how we know that there's up to 60% of food waste in those bins. The last of those audits was done 2 years ago, and that then informs our waste education program moving forward. I'm not sure that we've actually informed the community, other than through some of our waste education, about the outcomes of those audits. So we have another audit scheduled for later on this calendar year, and so we'll certainly look at how we can get more of that information about what we're finding in the audits out to our community, because it's very important information, and I think would shock you as it shocks us about what's going into some of our bins. So if we can work on that together, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Hiley. Mr John Hilvert.
Thank you, councillors, and I hope we have this shindig again, maybe the same time next year. As President of Business and Tourist Association, I give you a hearty welcome to return. I have a two-part question. Will the council rebate the jetty fees and damage to Mallacoota jetties for being underwater for several months and are unusable?
Mr Holton.
Thank you for your question. Council manages those the private jetty licences on behalf of the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and there are a range of, I guess, constraints that council has in terms of managing those licences. I'd like to take your question on notice and provide you a more informed response via email in the coming week or so, just so that I don't provide you with any misleading information. Okay, I understand that those private jetties have been impacted by the closure of the entrance, which of course council wouldn't be liable for, but it is an unfortunate situation. So I'd like to see what options are available for us before giving you an answer to that question, if that's okay.
Thank you. I'd welcome that. And secondly, due to the damage to infrastructure and business and danger to people currently trying to walk on slippery underwater jetties, will the council encourage all parties to reconsider the 1500 height level before you open the bar?
Mr Holton.
Again, this is one of those things that's not in council's direct control. There is a formula that is used by the various people who manage the waterway in determining when the time is ripe for creating a channel to reduce to reopen the entrance. The parties involved in that are the CMA, DELP, and Parks Victoria, and Councillor is probably at best an onlooker to some degree. However, I'm sure Council would consider, or officers would consider, speaking to the CMA as a first port of call to see what options are available for them.
Thank you, Mr Holton. We certainly welcome that, because the dilemma that many of our businesses and tourist organisations are finding is that there's no one to complain to. There are several, I think last time we counted there were 3 ministers, a catchment authority in there somewhere, a ports authority. We think, to quote from an early discussion, we're waiting for an accident to happen. Just about all the jetties, certainly around Cools Inlet, are unusable and are slowly eroding. That's not a question, that's an observation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr Hilbert.
Before you disappear, if I may, you stated before that the jetties have been underwater for several months now. How long would that period actually be?
Since, when was it?
It depends on the height of the jetties. Some of them have been under for what, 2 or 3 months? Others are, the water is lapping just above it when the waves come up.
Yeah, 3. We've had several people bring their boats in and turned around. We've had several cancellations from people who booked several months ago for their fishing expedition, and we've just lost them because it's just too dangerous, and there's no easy way for them to launch their boats.
Thank you. Miss Eileen Buckland.
Has there been any progress in the incident plan for Carbathong? We had a public meeting last year and they said all the Carbathong residents had to put in a request to legislate that Carbathong was a safe area, and we had that meeting and there were about 60 odd people that requested council to legislate that Carbathong area be a safe place.
Ms Nelson.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. There was a meeting in October last year. I think about 60 community members attended with all of the emergency services agencies where we did a scenario planning workshop, and there was quite a lot of discussion as part of that about review of the local incident management plan, and in particular creating an assembly point at the very least at Carbathong. Now, my understanding is at that meeting, a community committee was appointed to review the LIMP, and that work has been done, and that the draft document or the revised document is back with the community members who were nominated to just check that we have recorded everything correctly. So as soon as we have the tick off for that, then the revised LIMP will be published. That document does include the Carbathong area as an assembly area, acknowledging that Mallacoota is very dissected and there's a number of different parts of town, so it acknowledges that not everybody's going to make it into the Neighbourhood Safer Place right in town. And the other thing that was talked about was the use of a community siren for the Carbathong area. That's something that would need to continue to be worked through with the community, so that there are some communities that use the siren in for emergency warning purposes, but it needs to be embedded in all of the emergency management processes so that its purpose is actually understood. So that would be an ongoing conversation. But I'm happy to ask the emergency management staff to reconnect with the community committee and just see where the document's at. But the revision work has been
So
progressed.
I thought it would have really happened before this fire season, and we've escaped the bullet this year again, but it's so important that we're not left out in the cold.
Well, the review has actually happened. We're just checking with the community that it is actually right. So that was sent to the community earlier this year. So we just need to chase up what's happened with that.
I was on that committee, but I'm not aware. Anyway, so let's hope, it gets done before next summer.
Oh, it will.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Buckland. Ms Bridget Senior. Mr CEO, did you have a... Yes, please.
Ms Senior, I would just ask that for privacy reasons that in your question that you leave out the address of the issue that you're wishing to raise. If you could do that for us,
I
that
can
would be
mention
appreciated.
mine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but not
the other address,
okay.
if you could.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. How can council assist me with the rectification of an issue whereby the occupants next door to me continually move my rubbish bins as placed by me from the front of my property, 1 Fern Court, to the opposite side of the court, which is 4 Fern Court, for weekly collection. And part 2 of that is 14 years of speaking directly to the occupants of that particular address in relation to this matter has not been able to produce any acceptable outcome, and I'm just wondering how council can help me.
Thank you, Ms Weigel.
Thank you. This does seem to have perhaps have an element of neighbourhood dispute in it, and as such it's probably best that we take it off on our own notice, and then we can work directly with you rather than through this forum to rectify this issue or try and rectify this issue. Thank you.
So what do I do from here?
I've got your notes. We'll make contact with you in the forthcoming week to follow it up further.
Okay, because 14 years is not good for anyone's well-being, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Senior. And thank you for all your public questions. 1.8, record of assemblies of councillors for January and February 2019.
I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Thanks, Councillor Peltz. All those in favour? Thank you. 1.9, petitions. 1.9.1, petition of off-leash dog park, Meetung and surrounding areas. Ms Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report is essentially something of a holding report. The petition that has been lodged seeks an off-leash dog park in Meetung. Unfortunately, the petition was received a little too late for officers to be able to prepare a substantive response. So this response notes receipt of the petition and also commits officers to responding to it by Tuesday the 4th of June at the latest. Thank you.
Questions, councillors? No. We have a recommendation before us.
Happy to move that, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Tino. Thanks, Councillor Roberts, for seconding. All those in favour? This motion carried unanimously. Item 1.9.2, petition objecting to the removal of 18 car parks on Nicholson Street between Service Street and the mall. Mr Richards.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, councillors, you would be aware of the Nicholson Street upgrade project and also the petition received. I can advise that the number of signatories has actually, we've received additional signatories to that, and the number is up to 909. I guess in responding to that, my first point is that we understand the perception that less car parking equals less business, but there's several key points to consider. So firstly, viewed in isolation. So yes, there is a reduction of car parks for this particular project, but we need to acknowledge that this is part of a broader strategy. So councillors will be aware of the document, so Reimagining Bairnsdale, and also the Bairnsdale CBD car parking strategy. Also acknowledging that in recent years there's been an increase in car parking within the CBD. The numbers we have are 358 up to 427. As well as that, there's plans for more car parking to come. So be aware of the Port of Bairnsdale or the proposal to construct parking at the Port of Bairnsdale. There's also work going on to free up existing spaces. So we'll recall discussion about a current private car park where up to, I think the numbers were 73 out of 159 spaces were taken up for more than 5 hours on the particular day that it was surveyed. So this is not an isolated project, or the reduction of car parking as a result of this project is not isolated, it's part of a bigger picture. On that broader strategy, Councillors would recall a streetscape masterclass that was conducted in 2017 just regarding the theory of street development. Obviously members of the public were also invited and attended to that. And I guess the background behind that is in general we're wanting people to park outside of key areas and walking in those key CBD areas. This provides social benefit, also provides health benefits, and there is also economic benefit to that as well. So as mentioned above, what we're looking at doing, or the theory behind it, is more parking outside those key areas and then improving the amenities for pedestrians to make use of that location, more walkable, safer, and enjoy that CBD area. Other key points are the timing of the petition. So the design for this work, or the design for this project, was done around 2016. The tender itself was advertised in July 2018 and awarded at the September 2018 council meeting, and the works have actually commenced on that as of 1st of February. So there's obviously an associated cost with having to, if there is any cessation or change to that project scope, which needs to be considered. And the fourth point was just around the engagement, and just to clarify that there was significant engagement conducted as part of the design process. We acknowledge that there was feedback received, that there were some people opposed to the reduction of car parking or removal of some car parking. There were also comments, or there was also feedback supporting that, and even more reduction of more car parking. There were changes made based on that car parking, so there were, based on that feedback. So there was additional parking added to the north side of the street. Aside from that, prior to engagement of the tender, there was a walk around with the plans with local business owners in that area, and information was sent to the Bairnsdale Chamber of Commerce and Industry explaining the theory behind it and what was happening. So in summary, we understand that removing car parking from directly in front of businesses can be perceived negatively, but we believe the concept is sound. There are benefits to the entire project as well as the parking element. We believe there has been a good level of community engagement. And just with regards to the timing of the position, the cost of changing it at the moment, I guess the time to object was prior to engagement of the tender and through that design process. So there's a recommendation provided, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question, councillors? Councillor Rotino.
I know you have explained this before, but I just can't remember the net outcome for disability parking in that area and parking for elderly.
In that general project, at the moment there are no disabled car parks, and there is the installation of one disabled car park. But I guess acknowledging that those parks, there is a small number of parks within an area. I think it's 20 is the total, so 1 in 20.
Councillor Peltz.
In regards to that, were we going to put the bulk of those car parks that were closest to the shops as short-term 15-minute parking allotments for the elderly to get in and get out and then disappear again? I thought that was probably what the discussion was, because I remember standing in the mall with Fiona and some of the staff when they were talking to the community on that day about this project, and it was something that was flagged at that stage that those car parks along that street should be prioritised to the people that were elderly and had more of a disability than others. So I was just curious as to whether that's what the outcome is.
I'm happy to take that question. As you rightly identified, the whole principle around CBD is you have your short-term parking and your disability parking close in, and then you stagger it out so that you get to all-day parking, which is where our workers should be parking and walking in. So that's certainly the philosophy that will be applied to this parking. I think some of it is, it's half-hour parking is the shortest we go, because that allows some of our more elderly residents to get in and out of cars and get to the shops. And then we go out to 2-hour parking, and then beyond Pike Street is where we go to all-day parking. I guess it's also worth mentioning at this point that there's also been a net increase in the number of car parks in that precinct generally. Whilst there is a loss in this particular part of the street, overall in that precinct we've got a net increase of, I think it's in the report, but there's, I think it's up around 20 additional car parks. So there will be additional car parks in that precinct overall. So that's what Mr. Richards was alluding to when he said we need to look at this in its entirety, because within the precinct there is actually an increase in parking, not a decrease.
Thanks, Ms Weigel. Councillors? Okay, thanks, Councillor Peltz. If there's no other questions. Thanks, Councillor Toohey, for seconding. Speakers?
I'd just like to say to the community, this has been a long-term project. It's part of is it a 3 or a 4 stage project of Bairnsdale streetscape beautification? Yeah, stage 3, and you can see the benefits from the earlier stages of what we've implemented, and it's another stage. So it was done under really strict community consultation in the early stages, and it was done really sensibly and kindly to the community with their input. And I have to say I was a part of that, and I did take the time to go and stand down there on a Friday and chat to the community and get amongst them and with the staff, and if they had concerns, talk with them with the appropriate officers. So I have to say I was a part of this. I'm actually quite accepting of what we're trying to do here, and I don't see that there is, I think for the ultimate purpose it is actually beneficial. So whilst they're saying we may have lost car parks here, we've also gained them there, so net loss is minimal. So, okay, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Councillor Toohey? No? Speakers against? No? All those in favour? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Thanks, Mr Richards. Item 2, notices of motion and or rescission, Mr CEO.
Nil have been received, Madam Mayor.
Item 3, deferred business, and also nil. Okay, item 4, councillor reports. Councillor Toohey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My report has been sent in. There was three PCMs that we've done in the last month, but the item that I'd like to speak on just very briefly is another opening that I did at the East Gippsland Art Gallery, Evolutionary and Remembered Landscapes. It was something that I quite enjoyed, as I do every time doing an opening at our gallery. It's wonderful to see our community asset, and when I say our, I do believe it belongs to everybody, and I would invite anybody that wants to go and see some good art to go to the shows that are on at the moment. Some very good art from local artists, and very reasonably priced, I thought. So, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Toohey. Councillor Rotino.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've submitted my report. I just have a couple of things that I'd like to mention. The first one was the Gippsland Smart Specialisation Strategy, which we had a meeting with yourself and representatives from that organisation, which is a Melbourne University research undertaken by the Latrobe Valley Authority as an initiative relating to developing smart specialisation with Gippsland. It's a powerful regionalisation model used by many successful regions in Europe, and during an East Gippsland stakeholder engagement, that opportunity arose where they actually spoke to us because they want to speak to the whole of Gippsland, engage all of Gippsland in relation to this, not just the local governments that are part of the Latrobe Valley Authority. But in developing this smart specialisation strategy, they'll go through 5 stages of analysis of the regional potential, the governance framework around the collaboration, designing a shared vision for future and setting the priorities, an action plan around the implementation, and then the monitoring and evaluation of how effective it is. The aim is the project will explore, design and test a Gippsland specialisation model reference group called GS3 for the Latrobe Valley Authority, drawing explicitly on the principle of co-design with regional stakeholders. The key objective in building on community strengths and capability for the future, leveraging collaboration and innovation, growing industry competitiveness, social cohesion and ecological sustainability. The other outcomes will clearly identify capabilities and enablers that grow future industry and competitiveness, skills and competencies needed to ensure sustainable job creation and retention, partnership brokering and networking to support innovation, sustainable projects to demonstrate and trial this strategy. So a really important piece of work that's happening in our region at the moment. The other thing that I'd just like to quickly mention is around the East Gippsland Marketing series of business breakfasts. It's an opportunity for people to go along and actually see the business that's hosting that particular breakfast. The last one was held at Slap Architects in Bairnsdale, along with Simon Anderson Consulting Engineers. And I strongly encourage other councils to get along to those breakfast series and broaden knowledge around the different businesses that make up our community. And lastly, because the Mallacoota students are here, I'd probably like to encourage them to look at the Arthur Grasbury Kokoda Scholarship opportunity that's open to all secondary students in East Gippsland, and it's a scholarship that actually supports several students to go to this on this annual Kokoda trek and learn a lot about what happened there on Kokoda and bring back those learning qualities. And yeah, it's a real opportunity to get involved as part of that leadership program. And it was fantastic to hear from the young people that have actually done the walk and how it's actually changed their lives and the leadership things that they took away from actually doing Kokoda. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be back here in Mallacoota in the rain. So if we can just share that across the state, please. There's a few events that I've been lucky enough to participate in and represent council on in the last month, but I'll just draw your attention to one in particular, and that is the great role that I have on the LARJAC, the Local Aboriginal Justice Advisory Committee. And currently, just for your information, East Gippsland is the only local government authority in Gippsland that is represented on a LARJAC or a RARJAC across the whole of Gippsland. And participation in LARJAC is much more than just symbolic. It's about having a conduit through the LGA to representation on the LARJAC with the likes of VicPol, Department of Justice, Victorian Legal Service, Legal Aid and so on. And that's really important for us to be able to be represented around that table. Terribly important. And conversely and reciprocally, it's important that I can carry back from that group to the council group the importance of that representation through meetings like this. It's really very important. And what I was asking, and for example, being able to represent the message from GLAWAC, GJAC, Muji, that our RAP is important, our Reconciliation Action Plan is important, and it's a very strong message that we as a council can provide to be a truly inclusive organisation. But Mayor, I'm wondering, and Mr CEO, if I can ask you on behalf of the LARJAC, could you make representations at GLGN and our colleagues there that the other Gippsland local governments could also consider having councillor representation on LARJAC and RARJAC because of the importance of that? And that's the message I'd like to convey this afternoon.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Roberts.
Nothing to report, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Recently we had a meeting at the Omeo Historical Society and they're a bit concerned. They've asked several times for the paling fence facing the road be repaired and replaced actually with a new fence. and they asked me to bring that up. I don't know whether, I believe it already has come through. I don't know whether the council's done anything about it or not, but I was asked to press that issue. And the passing of Billy Flanagan, has that been mentioned? It hasn't come across my desk, but have we done something about that? He was a former president. We fixed it up, did we? Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. That's all I have to report.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Very little, just like to welcome everyone here today for our meeting here at Mallacoota, the first, as you reminded us, since 1997. I'm just going to run through a couple of quick things very quickly. I attended the Australian Paper Manufacturers' launch of their feasibility study and the waste and energy project in Gippsland. Further met with the Minister in relation to the China sword recyclables crisis that some of the members of our community questioned here today. I further attended planning consultation meetings for a number of projects around the Shire and partook in the annual AGM and workshops of the Rail Alliance. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just one item I'd like to speak about. It was last week in conjunction with Crime Stoppers, Victoria Police and East Gippsland forming an alliance to the community to dob in a drug dealer. Very important messages there for our community, that no matter how small or how insignificant you think of something you have seen, please make the authorities aware, because they will put all this together and possibly will prosecute drug dealers, because we need to preserve our young people, and I just urge you all to be very vigilant. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor White. Councillor Peltz.
Thanks very much, Madam Mayor. My report comes from a grassroots level. I am a grassroots councillor, and I think my report sort of reflects that. And I'd like to thank you all, the Mallacoota community, for coming out today. Just recently I've been down in Melbourne chatting with other peers, other councillors, and they said, oh, how many people attend your meetings? And I said, regularly we're getting a lot. So 30 people out in from this community is quite a big faction of people attending. So we thank you all for participating today and joining us, because quite often my other peers reflect and they say we don't get anyone at our meetings. So we must be doing something of interest for you all to be turning up. So with that said, East Gippsland's hot, dry spell, although ironically it is raining right now, it continues, and the little rain that we've had has quickly been evaporated, not lasting long enough for any decent crop growth to be of significance. The talk around the region from the older folk is that we haven't seen dry times such as this before in their years. So I'm talking to people in their 80s and 90s, and they're virtually saying we've not seen it as dry as this ever across the whole of East Gippsland. Whilst we've had areas, this is actually holistic of the whole region. So when we're talking drought funding, we're not just talking about Lindenow or Orbost or, you know, Buchan, or we're talking the whole region. So the funding that we're talking about, may it be $1 million, it doesn't go very far when it comes to having to service the whole of our region, the 20,000 hectares that we actually cover. So, and I'm not sure, going on further, where February went, but I can honestly say it went in a flash, and I'm now in the thought that the world is speeding up and getting quicker, because February came and went, January came and went, and to me, we're now in March and we're well and truly into 2019. And thus far, I have to say, it's not been an easy start for many in East Gippsland at grassroots level. For many, waking up in the morning and looking out the window to see no rain on the horizon, no grass to feed their animals, little growth in their crops, and no water in the water tanks. No income to buy groceries, and how are we going to pay for those bills? On the other hand, the others are waking up in the morning to the smell of smoke. Smoke on the horizon, bushfires not far away, exactly the same scenario. Up here in Mallacoota, we find that the inlet, we've arrived and we weren't actually aware of this, and we've arrived on your doorstep to find that you've been struggling with the estuary being closed for some 3 months now, and you're actually dealing with inundation. So with that said, the council group and I are looking at proposing something which might help you later in this meeting, and I hope that it will satisfy your the outcomes. So these are the heartfelt feelings of many people in our community who have never faced something like this before in their lives. The real truth is this scenario is the drought, it's the bushfires, and it's the inundation. We are copying conditional, unusual conditional condition that we haven't actually faced before. Those saying old timers, they remember that or in years to come will be saying, as old timers will be saying, it's the 1819 drought or the fire that we remember. But I question, what have we learnt from it all? Quite ironically, last week I travelled to Melbourne to attend the Victorian Transport Infrastructure Summit, and I have to say I was very underwhelmed about the whole thing. It was organised by the Vic Minister for Transport and Infrastructure, the Honourable Jacinta Allen, and I say I was underwhelmed because they're talking about million and billion dollar projects happening in and around Melbourne, and yes, it will help the connectivity of our communities travelling down there, but there was nothing, absolutely nothing, no upgrades to anything in our region. And when I did question about how they proposed to improve the rail service to the East Gippslanders, I was looked at with big eyes and virtually, how dare you talk about the elephant in the room? Certainly the talk around our region, there's no stimulus jobs for us. In fact, the timber industry is the next thing to go. And I find this extremely hard to calculate. I look at it and we've just had timber renewals of timber industry contracts only 3 months ago. The contracts are for a 5-year period, and only 3 months later the state government is actually talking about payouts for those people that have just received 5-year terms to their contracts. These committed hard-working people are being replaced with a walking track from the Errinundra Plateau to Cape Conran. Whilst this sounds quite pleasant, I do believe the two can actually exist side by side, and they should be respectful of the timber industry and the processes that they do. I don't want to go to Bunnings or to Dalson's and buy timber that's imported from the Portuguese or from anywhere else in the world that doesn't have such great harvesting methodologies as what we have here in Australia. To me, I look at it and I think, what is the point of actually buying timber from overseas that the practices are actually endangering world-class rainforests? And basically I find it actually hard to take. I say the two should exist side by side. With 75% of our region predominantly covered in trees, it makes little sense to me that the only people who should be able to have decent wages should live in Urbia, being Melbourne, and that us in the outer urb should be satisfied with being the playground region for those who fancy visiting every now and again. Truly, state government, answer me this: what makes a community sustainable on its own merit? And you should drive for this. It would be less draining on the economy and its resources. And on a happier note, I'd like to finish with a good news story from the Orbost community. And I'm delighted to say that in response to the drought relief for the farmers of the region, the Orbost branch of the CWA is starting up again, and they're due to have their first meeting Wednesday night, tomorrow night. And I'd personally like to wish them all the best, and I'll be joining them because I strongly believe in the basis of the CWA and their community that they represent. And that concludes my report. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. I'll just quickly do a brief report on mine. It's obviously been a busy month again, and I'll just focus on the drought because we've had a lot of meetings with several politicians who have visited the region in the last couple of weeks. We've had Minister for Agriculture, Jacqueline Symes, come down when she announced the state government's drought package. and she spoke with a few farmers in the Orbost area. We also had Prime Minister Scott Morrison and the Federal Minister for Agriculture, David Littleproud, and our federal member for Gippsland, Darren Chester, come to Briargalong and speak with a large number of farmers in relation to the impact the drought is having on them and the sorts of funding and assistance they need. He also spoke to the Premier and would be reinforcing the need for rate relief, as that's the most common assistance or sorts of assistance that we are hearing from our farmers. And we had a drought reference group meeting yesterday, which our federal member Darren Chester also attended to, and we're really looking at ways that we can help make sure that the help provided from all the agencies and levels of government meets the needs of our community and on the ground. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Officer reports, 5.1.1, I Love Kinder Federal Advocacy Campaign. Ms Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report seeks Council support for the I Love Kinder campaign, which has been designed to advocate to the federal government in the lead up to the upcoming election to seek their continuation of funding for their contribution to what has been known as 4-year-old kindergarten, but it's now kind of being known as the year before school part of the kindergarten education system. So since 2013, all of the federal government and the state and territory governments have all contributed to jointly fund 15 hours of kindergarten a week for every child, so as a universal service, and the federal government contributes a third of that funding. In the May 2018 budget, the federal coalition government said that it would cut funding for the kindergartens after December 2019, so after the end of this year. And the impact of that is that it would result in families needing to find an estimated $2,000 extra a year for them to ensure that their children can access that early years education provided by kindergarten. The evidence that's available in terms of the value of investing in early years education is quite extensive and very well recognised. And it's something that we believe is really important for a community like East Gippsland, where the ability for families to afford to access what is essentially an optional education, part of the education system, is actually, you know, the ability to afford that is often not the reality for many families. So Council, East Gippsland Shire doesn't run kindergarten services, but we certainly have a role in providing the facilities that are used to run those services, and we have a role in planning for the way that we achieve really great outcomes for families and young people in this community in a strategic sense, working in collaboration with a whole range of organisations, which from this report you can see are all very supportive of funding for kindergarten services. So on that basis, the recommendation from officers is that Council does join in this campaign, which is being promoted by the Municipal Association of Victoria, and the recommendations are that we make our views known in the lead up to the federal election, so that there can be some resolution of guarantee of funding for kindergarten services. Happy to answer questions.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Tui, thank you for moving. Councillor Rotino, second. Any speakers for the motion? Councillor Tui.
Yes, I'm happy to move this recommendation. Aside from the benefit that our community gets, the 2 to 4 times the cost at the time later down the track, and if I may, I've got some information here regarding research that's been done and shows that these children have a smoother transition to primary school, have better social and cognitive skills compared to children who do not attend kinder, on average have superior literacy and numeracy once they're at school. In school and beyond, young people who attend kinder remain ahead of those who don't attend, are more likely to finish year 12, and on average experience higher levels of employment, financial security, health and well-being, and I think that's just a terrific outcome and we should be supporting this.
Thanks, Councillor Tui. Any further speakers? Councillor Rotino.
Just want to, would like to support Councillor Tui's comments. Absolutely understand the value of affordable kinder, but for a region like ours, which is highlighted in the CEFA index for disadvantage, even more important. And yeah, I wholeheartedly second this motion.
Councillor Peltz.
I'd like to speak in support of the motion and just stating I recall when the federal government brought this initiative in some 5-6 years ago, and we actually were struggling on how we were going to implement this, and I sort of find it a bit bizarre that, you know, sort of not far down the track they're actually trying to get out of paying the funding for it, and it's very minimal compared with the benefits. And I believe it's something their contribution to society, and they should fulfil it. So yes, let's keep enforcing this and pushing the wheelbarrow on it. Absolutely.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 5.2.1, planning permit application 223/2018P, application for a 2-lot subdivision at 33 Jarramond Road, Orbost. Mr. Sadler would like to speak. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors, for the opportunity to speak to this application on behalf of my clients Alan and Lorraine Brown, long-term residents of Orbost. Disappointingly, the first line that I'd like to bring to council's attention out of the officer's report, which hopefully you've all read and been able to comprehend and read between the lines. It's an energetic report, which if the officer put as much energy into granting approvals as he does knocking them back, I'd be first to applaud him. The line says, although the scheme may allow for the application to be made, it is argued the outcome is contrived, one that seeks to utilise a planning provision not intended to result in the creation of rural residential lifestyle allotments. We already have a rural residential allotment. It's 10 hectares. This isn't being created by this application. This application, as I've written in the first line of my report, the purpose of the application is to segment the existing dwelling from the rural component of the land, as a low-lying area is considered to be surplus to the needs of the current owners. My clients have been attempting to dispose of this property for a number of years, and the reluctance has been for the market to meet anywhere near fair market value when you consider that 8.5 hectares of this land is absolutely prime agricultural land. And if you looked on, I think it's about page 28 of the officer's report, you'll see an image where we actually show the area of land which is subject to inundation and prime Orbost flats. If this property was in Lindenau, it would be zoned farming zone schedule 4, and you would have subdivision allotments minimum size of 1 hectare. By quirk of planning, for some reason the Orbost flats does not have that particular zoning. Further on, we are not attempting, as I say, to promote any form of further development on the agricultural part of this property, which now is 8.5 odd hectares, and we've actually noted that the applicant seeks approval for a dwelling excision to create lot 1 of approximately 1.35 hectares, and whilst lot 2 will be less than the minimum lot size, which if you don't know is 40 hectares for this zone, specified under Schedule 1 of the farming zone, it'll enable a future purchaser to make better use of fertile land which is currently underutilised. There is no expectation that proposed lot 2 will grow a dwelling. I think the officer's report in suggesting we're creating multiple rural residential lifestyle allotments is so misleading that we're just trying to break away and get into the marketplace the prime agricultural land rather than give expectation to additional dwellings. Any additional dwelling on an 8.5 hectare property, even if council are able to police the absolute control of whether a dwelling could even be applied for, and you are in absolute control. And in granting this particular permit, one of the conditions a council could do is actually impose a Section 173 agreement on the 8.5 hectare rural parcel, which suggests if you want the permit, enter into an agreement which prohibits further development of the land with a dwelling. You could have an appropriate rural outbuildings, which, you know, there's area on the land for that, a hay shed or whatever. But if council were of a mind to grant this application, the concept is you could have a belts and braces approach and impose a 173 agreement, but you already have the planning scheme controls and where it sits. For those people who don't know where the property is, this is about 50 metres from where you've just rezoned the property owned by Orbost Civil and Civic, or the Weatherall family, to low density, to rural living zone development coming off Boundary Road. It is not a remote rural parcel, and it is not an intention to create a low density residential parcel. It already exists. All we're doing is breaking away and freeing up in a fair market approach, 8.5 hectares of prime agricultural land, which it's easy to say could be done by boundary alignment and added into an adjoining neighbour, but that is only one purchaser we can deal with. We're saying in its proximity to the township, where someone could literally have some sort of cash crop coming out of Orbost, you know, some vegetable or even a decent horse paddock in that precinct. It could be easily acquired, and when Orbost is crying out for some form of lifeblood, to have an expansive report take us straight down the path that we're promoting the creation of rural residential allotments, counter to all of the state policies. I've been doing this job for long enough that I would not let and embarrass my clients by starting an application which was fundamentally flawed. I know the rules. I know that you're not meant to take land out of rural production, and here we are, we're trying to put land back into rural production, and I get a tirade of about a contrived outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Sadler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Question, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is for Mr. Sadler. So your client would be willing to engage in a Section 173 agreement to restrict the use of the subdivided land?
Councillor Roberts, absolutely. As I said, but in my mind, and I come to this forum plenty of times, either myself or through my office, and we're always trying to get rid of 173 agreements which are there forever. This is one where you don't need it because you actually can apply for a planning. If someone applied for a planning permit, council has all the powers to say, no, we won't grant the permit. However, if you wanted that certainty, my clients would absolutely be prepared to take it if it means it can break the impasse of how they free up a very well presented home from a piece of land which I'm not a real estate valuer, but is not an insignificant amount of money, and we're trying to find someone who wants both bits, and we just can't find that person. So if the price is a 173 agreement they have to pay, so be it.
Yes, Councillor Roberts.
This is for Director Holton. Can you please remind the gallery what rights a landowner would have in the rural farming zone in regards to a sole dwelling?
In the farming zone, it is as of right for someone to be able to develop a dwelling on an allotment of 40 hectares or 100 acres. Anything under that would require a planning permit application to be submitted.
So this falls less than 100 acres, so the landowner would not be able to build?
Without a planning permit. They would have the right to apply for a planning permit to erect a dwelling, and then that would be considered on its merits.
Thank you. Councillor Peltz had a question.
Yes, I do. With regards to this, and I'm not sure whether it's Paul or Michael, but I can see what the applicant is wanting to do here, and I do feel for them because the bulk of the land, or the whole lot of the land, is farm zoned, and it is on the fringe of the Orbost Township. It is acceptable that that portion that they're wishing to subdivide off could actually be zoned low density residential or even rural living zone, which is over the road and abuts it anyway. What's the process of achieving that? Because I believe that's what the applicant wants to achieve. Do they actually subdivide the block off and then get it rezoned, or is it actually zoned first? Because the bottom half of this block, the majority of the block that they're leaving, as Mr Sadler said, is actually prime farm zone, and it is in a dip, and it's a section that actually floods. The section where the house is, I know it very well because we almost purchased it at one stage, but it actually would merit that it had opportunity to have probably three subdivisions on the house section that they're proposing, and it would still fit within the rural living zone, the low density residential zone category if it was subdivided even later on. So it's a bit like the chicken and the egg. Does the egg come first or the chicken? Do you subdivide the block off and rezone it, or do you rezone it and then subdivide it off, but you can't go back to it, to the farm zone section?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Peltz. And yes, it is complicated. But what we have in front of us is an application for subdivision, and we must consider the application on that basis. Any subsequent application for rezoning would necessarily be subject to a completely separate application process, and the merits of that proposal would need to be put forward at that time. And again, that would be considered on its merits as well. So at this stage, there is a proposal for a subdivision. It did not, at the time it was submitted, contain any reference to a Section 173 agreement prohibiting further development on that piece of land. That's one of the considerations that on reading the report, that the planning officer has taken into account and has ultimately arrived at their recommendation to put forward a refusal.
Thank you. Councillor White.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Address this to you, Michael. If this subdivision did occur, and we're saying that it's prime agricultural land, it's actually only a small parcel of land that's probably not being utilised because of its size. So therefore, would be my thoughts that if it was purchased by a neighbour, economies of scale would see an uplifting of its production as it stands now, which would be an advantage. In other words, there would be more produced off it if it was excised or amalgamated with another property, and the people were able to live just in their home close to town.
Councillor Watt, I think the Orbost real estate market over the journey has suggested to my clients that to try and find someone who wants a home of the quality and also wants to work another 20 odd acres of fertile country, that marriage isn't being found. And so the consequence is they're senior in years, they either basically offer it up at bargain basement, and it's just the realistic value is never received. And I know in the planning scheme it says subdivision isn't meant to be a form of reward for superannuation. It says that, and I'm well aware of it. But there's a point, and I take Councillor Pell's point, you don't do by rezoning what you can do with a simple planning permit application. We can achieve everything we want without dragging the whole property and the area through a rezoning to achieve what a single planning permit application could achieve.
Councillor Peltz.
With regards to Councillor Roberts' 173 agreement proposal, would we be able to put a 173 agreement that portion that was around the house, the smaller lot number 1, be rezoned into low density residential, and the rest of the farm remain the same, because that's what I actually think they're trying to achieve. I'm wondering whether a 173 agreement would be appropriate for an outcome such as that.
Look, I'm advised that that wouldn't be appropriate in this as part of this application. And I think what's being referred to in respect of the 173 agreement is really putting in place a legal agreement that runs on title that prevents the development of a house on the balance lot, on the larger allotment, so that it wouldn't be seen as being some sort of, like subsequent breaking up of that block by the death of 1,000 cuts, so to speak. And that's all that's being talked about.
Thanks. Councillor Rotino.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Along the lines of where Councillor Roberts was going, Mr. Holton, would you have an alternate motion or recommendation prepared with a 173 agreement? What would that look like?
As it happens, Councillor Rotino, we are prepared with such a alternate motion, and my colleague Aaron Hollow is prepared to come up and speak to that, if you don't mind.
We just had one more question before I get Mr. Hollow. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just one final point of clarification. Because the land that would be subdivided, the excised land would still remain in the farming zone and it would fall less than 100 acres, it would not be able to be built on without a planning application. And if a planning application was received, it would likely be refused because of the zoning overlay. So therefore, a 173 agreement probably isn't necessary either, because we could consider it at a later date. Is that correct?
Well, I think that's a statement. A 173 agreement to preclude any future development of a property would do just that. It is still the owner of the land would still be able to apply for a planning permit application and to build a house, and as we like to think, we would generally not preempt an outcome of a planning permit application that has not been made at this stage. So whilst I take on board your observation that you may consider it unlikely, but all planning permit applications are considered on their merits at the time that they're made. So there is also, obviously, if a 173 agreement is placed on the land to prevent that coming forward, an application can also be made to remove a 173 agreement. So in any case, there is a variety of checks and balances there that don't sterilise land completely for any particular purpose.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Rotino.
Yeah, look, I'm keen on the 173 agreement because if Mr. Sadler's likening this land similar to the Lindenow Flats, it needs to be protected. I mean, at some stage, that land in old terminology was worth $25,000 an acre, Michael. So I think the only way we can protect it is and achieve what's in front of us today is around the 173 agreement with any surety.
Councillor Reeves.
Mr. Holden, can I just seek clarification? In the report, it does actually mention that the application does not include consolidation of land with adjoining farmland and does not support the imposition of a Section 173 legal agreement.
That was the officer's reading of the application, and subsequently that is the officer's what the officer has included in this report.
Mr. Sadler.
By way of clarification to that point, I'd take you back to a discussion I can say Mr. Hollow and myself had before Deputy President Gibson at VCAT, where she pointed us both in the chest and said, why do you need a 173 agreement if the planning scheme already tells you you've got control under the planning scheme to consider the permit? Council is the final arbiter on that permit, and then obviously the appeal process. So it's my personal view and long-standing that you don't enter into unnecessary 173 agreements where you've already got powers under the planning scheme, the same as don't rezone land for something you can already do under a planning permit. However, if it means for clarity we want a 173 agreement, the client's prepared to have it. But the genesis in my report, which is where it started, was I don't want a 173 agreement as a matter of principle just for housekeeping purposes if the planning scheme doesn't ask for it.
Thank you, Mr. Sadler. Mr. Hollow, would you please come and speak to the report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, obviously there's a report in front of you, and I can see that there has been considerable homework done in relation to the reading of that report and its outcomes. I would simply suggest to councillors that this application is what we would refer to as an ad hoc subdivision. It's the subdivision to excise a dwelling in a farming zoned area where we're creating a situation where there could be adverse impacts to other agricultural enterprises that surround this property. I go to your questions, Councillor Pells, and that is that in the case where Mr Weatherall chose to create a rural living zoned development, he went through a process of a planning scheme amendment. He justified that application. He was able to demonstrate that the land was suitable for that purpose. He was able to also provide a planning permit application with the rezoning to be read in conjunction, and that we were able to make sure the appropriate servicing was provided to the land. This proposal, and I do take the point, there can be some difficulties in certain markets, but this application looks like an ad hoc outcome from a planning perspective. There is no strategic reason why we would allow for the further excision of a small lot within a farming zone to take place. And that's based on the planning policy within our planning scheme. Nevertheless, councillors, you asked me to the table to in particularly talk to the Section 173 agreement, and I've, with my officer's due diligence, they've prepared an alternative recommendation for your consideration. And that particular condition it would be number 2 of maybe an alternative motion that might get moved here this afternoon. And that's a condition saying that before a statement of compliance is issued, the owner must enter into agreement with the responsive authority under Section 173 of the Planning Environment Act to provide for the following. A, Lot 2 must not be used or developed for the purpose of a dwelling, and the owner must pay costs of the preparing, lodging and registering the agreement and any subsequent amendment, removal or other dealing associated with the agreement, and the agreement must be registered on the certificate of title for the land. I would proffer, council, that in my view, and we have moved on from that decision where Mr Sadler and myself appeared in front of VCAT to discuss it, we have moved on, and some of the research that we've noticed, in particular with subdivisions in the farming zone, that is that where there's an underlying policy that states that we should not be allowing for fragmentation of agricultural land, but should the council determine that it is the best use for this land, that you should prevent the balanced allotment becoming a further rural living allotment. And I would proffer that it's better to go with an agreement in this case because it gives any subsequent owner that purchases the land a clear understanding that this land is not a rural living block, it is a farming lot or farming lot, and that its use is for farming purposes and not for the purposes of a dwelling. So I would think it's a better outcome both from any future purchaser maybe getting the wrong idea about what they can do on the land, but it also adds to the argument that some councillors have said today about that if it gets aggregated, well, hopefully it gets aggregated into a larger land holding for the purposes of farming. And I think that's a good outcome, and that's why I'd argue for the agreement to be put in place rather than not to be put in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hollow. Are there any further questions from councillors? Councillor Toohey?
Would that Section 173, and maybe Paul, I'm asking you, in regards to the Section 173, if that allotment were joined to an adjoining allotment, sorry, I forget the term there, would that person then be able to get rid of the Section 173 agreement, and what potential implications could there be for that moving forward?
So if the block of land were amalgamated or brought into the one ownership with another larger block of land, and that resulted in a larger farming allotment being available. That was that there would be some sort of strategic and good solid reason for removing the 173 agreement, preventing the development of a dwelling on it, then that case would need to be made at the time. So they would have the trigger to be able to do that on the basis that there was a change in circumstances. And it may be that if it was, say whoever bought it amalgamated with a lot that brought it up to the minimum lot size, then that would provide some kind of reasonable justification for an application to come forward to remove that 173 agreement, because it probably wouldn't be appropriate in the circumstance.
Councillor Peltz.
It's sounding like there's an appetite to not support the recommendation, and if that was the case, what happens then?
I'm sorry, if I can. Well, the process would be that if that motion, the current recommendation of the officers is not supported, then the officers have prepared an alternative motion for the councillors that is the opposite to this motion. That actually. Can we see that, please, so we can have consideration? You made several copies, did you, Aaron? Ah, very good.
Councillor White, further question.
This question is to you, Michael. So if this is an alternative motion, your clients would have to be in agreement with that, would they not?
Any further questions, councillors? Sure. Councillor Roberts.
I've got a question. It's one of the dot point 3 is requesting that the owner of the land must enter into agreements with relevant authorities for the provision of water, drainage, sewerage, electricity and gas to each lot. If there's a 173 agreement being imposed to prevent a dwelling being built, why would you require those services to be provisioned?
There's a mandatory requirement as part of the planning scheme to put that condition down, the two-lot subdivision. The fact is that the agreement might be with the authorities. There is no agreement.
Any further questions?
I'm happy to move it.
Move the alternative.
I'm happy to move the alternative motion, but there's I really want to see this application go through, because I think it's a very fair and reasonable request, and I think the officers have done an extremely thorough job. My only concern is I agree with the proponent, and I believe the 173 is potentially unnecessary based on the size of the subdivision. However, if we can get it across the line, I'm happy to support it. So, thank you.
Yep. Councillor Rotino, you're happy to second?
I'm happy to second it with the 173 section remaining in it. So I think it's valuable farmland needs to be protected.
Just seek a bit of clarification of the request here. You're requesting for, in the alternative motion, for sewerage, drainage and sewerage and all of that. The house itself is actually not on mains, it's on main water, but it's on septic tank. And so I think it's an unreasonable ask to be actually asking for the sewerage to be put on that particular block. And I know the house, it's about a 60 square house. You could roller skate up the hallway. It's a very big house. And I understand those people's request that I actually believe it should be rezoned as low density residential lot number 1. And I don't know if we can write that into this so that the bottom section, lot number 2, is actually stays in rural living, farm zone, but lot number 1 be rezoned.
So if I could take your first question, that's a mandatory requirement of the planning scheme in a 2-lot subdivision, so you have to put that condition down with every 2-lot subdivision. But in going to the authorities can say, it's not in the sewer district, we haven't got sewer, the agreement is you don't need an agreement with us to sewer the land. So authorities take a reasonable approach.
But they have to...
But we must put it down. In terms of your second question, we can't mix the 2 streams of planning. You've got the statutory side, which this has been lodged under with a planning permit application. We've got the strategic side that rezones land. Should the owner of the excise dwelling wish to see their land rezoned, they're more than welcome to put forward a private planning scheme amendment to seek to rezone their land, and they'll be required to go through all the strategic justification to do so. But it wouldn't fit and it wouldn't be right to mix the 2 things in a statutory document as a planning permit. It's something that the applicant would not be in control of.
Can I ask, on that basis, would they be able to then sell that property as a farm zone, lot number 1, on its own merit?
Yes.
Councillor Roberts.
One more small one from me. Just a point of clarification in regards to point 3 again. So just to clarify, hypothetically, if a farming block in the hills well separated away from any residential land, if there was an application to subdivide put through, say, Castleburn, would that still be subject to point 3?
Yes, it would, and it's a reasonable type of condition to have on, just to make sure that you've got the ability to provide services if they're available. Often they're not available, so I understand entirely the premise of your question, but it's reasonable to make sure that the end user after a subdivision isn't having to pick up all those costs.
Councillor Reeves.
Mr. Hollow, there's no suggestion there's going to be provision of optic fibre cable out there, is there? Because that provision 4 suggests that should be terrific, but...
I think you're very correct, Councillor, but once again, to lessen the burden on the telecommunication agencies, they made a planning scheme amendment that said whenever you're subdividing land, you must put these mandatory conditions down on any permit that's issued.
So it won't be hard for the proponent to prove that there's no suggestion of a provision of optic fibre cable there?
Absolutely not.
If there's no other questions, we've got the amended motion before us, so we'll have to vote on that. So all those in favour?
Do we have a seconder?
Councillor Rotino.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah. All those in favour?
Can we just run over the motion again for Councillor Buckley, please?
So the amended motion that was passed around, yes, so we're voting on that to become the substantive motion. Yeah. So all those in favour? Yeah. So Councillor Ellis is yes. Okay. So the motion now becomes the substantive motion. So are there any further speakers? No. Yes. So do we have a mover for this motion now, Councillor Roberts? Thank you. Second, Councillor Peltz. No further speakers. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hollow. (5.3.1) Warren Beena Studio Gallery funding application. Thank you, Mr Morton.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Councillors, before you is a application that Council received from the Warrambina Art Studio in Lakes Entrance. This subsequently was assessed by Council's Economic Development Advisory Board. The application is such that it's seeking a contribution of $15,000 from Council's Economic Discretionary Fund for the establishment or assisting with the establishment of the already existing art gallery in Lakes Entrance around Indigenous art. If councillors are aware, the gallery is on Meyer Street down in Lakes Entrance. The Murrumbina studio actually received funding from Creative Victoria, and since then have had a number of workshops assisting the community in the development of art within that space from the Indigenous community. So Lakes Entrance being the second largest Aboriginal population in the state. They were lucky enough to secure a three-year lease on the premises down in Lakes, and the grant, if approved, or contribution from council, would go towards fitting out of the shop front to make it a little bit more appealing, and also some installation of lighting and some other art hanging space inside the facility itself. So the application was approved by Council's Economic Development Advisory Board, and it's before you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr Morton. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Peltz.
I'm just curious about the discretionary fund, because we had X amount of money over a term period, and you delegated a bit of the funding out and committed it over a series of years. Is that right? What's happened? And so we actually have. We actually do have $15,000 to be offering this group as a one-off payment, because I thought we were sort of up to our limit on what we were spending it on.
Thanks for your question. So the Economic Development Discretionary Fund is gets contributions from council's commercial rating. That's on commercial properties. So that figure goes into that discretionary fund per year. So at the moment, yes, there is $15,000 available within that account. Yep.
Any other questions? No? Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Councillor Reeves, second. Any further speakers? Councillor Rotino?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'd encourage people to go and have a look at this fantastic facility in Meyer Street. I think it's the start of putting some life back into Meyer Street. It's fantastic having the art available for our tourists, and I encourage people to visit it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reeves?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. This is another great addition to the diversity of and culture of our particular area, so bring it on.
Thank you. Okay, I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour? Motion carried unanimously. 5.4.1, report on Audit and Risk Committee meeting held on 26th of February 2019.
Possibly, but perhaps we could go to 5.4.2 while we...
Okay. Yep, sure.
Councillor White's.
We'll just move over to 5.4.2. Proposed special council meeting to consider rural councils... Oh no, that's Marianne as well. Sorry. 5.4.3, implementation of the Drought Communities Program extension projects. Request to delegate authority to the Chief Executive Officer to authorise project procurement. Ms Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's the longest report title I think we've had in a while, sorry. I don't need to tell council and the community that, you know, we're dealing with drought in East Gippsland. That's the reality. That means that we have an opportunity, as councillors know, to apply for $1 million to put towards some projects that are designed to really encourage economic activity and to benefit the community longer term through the provision of infrastructure. We've made application for that $1 million, and in that there are two quite substantial projects that we'd like to progress. The reality is this funding comes with some very tight timeframes to achieve, and while we we'll do our very best to make sure those timeframes are achieved. What we're looking for here is a change to the current financial delegations to the Chief Executive Officer for these particular projects, these quite specific projects, to be approved, for contracts to be approved by the CEO, so that we can progress the procurement processes for these projects as urgently as possible. So it is for these two projects only. It's not a change to the delegations in any other way, purely and simply to make sure that we can deliver these projects as efficiently as possible.
Thanks, Ms Nelson. Questions, councillors? Okay, thanks, Councillor Rotino. Councillor Reeves, second. Speakers?
Madam Mayor, thank you. Just briefly, it's really important, this type of infrastructure, and the way we're spending it is the knock-on effect of drought affects local economies. Using local contractors to do this type of work keeps money spinning around in our economy. Nothing more, nothing less. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Councillor Roberts?
Yeah, I would like to speak in support of the motion, and I'd just also like to point out for people that have been following in media around some concerns around council's intention on this grant, on how to spend this grant money. And as was alluded to before, we come from a very large shire, and there's not a whole, this is not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. So if it's very hard to get the money directly into the farmers' hands, and if you do give it directly to the farmers, they don't really get a whole lot. So you need to try and stimulate the industry in some way, and the councillor group are working extremely hard to try and brainstorm and find more effective ways in the long term and how we can progress. And I know Madam Mayor has been doing great work in this front to give support to our drought-affected community members and farmers. So it's not just a free livestock exchange upgrade. There's a lot more to it than that, and we're working extremely hard to try and get a good outcome for the community.
Well said, Councillor Roberts. Any further speakers? Yeah, I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour? Motion carried unanimously. Okay. We'll move back to 5.4.1, report on Audit and Risk Committee meeting held on the 26th of February 2019. Mr CEO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and councillors. As you can see from the report, there was a meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee held recently. The report outlines those items that were discussed and addressed, and the progress of some very significant audit reports. We also had an update from our internal and our external auditors that is also covered in the report for your information. The purpose of this report is really for council to note that we held the meeting and that the minutes are available therefore for their information.
Thanks, Mr CEO. Are there any questions, councillors? No? Councillor Peltz.
Yeah, only because it was part of our baby in the first place, the Raymond Island Ferry update, and I noticed here the committee noted that the action had been delayed due to council officers proactively commissioning an independent review of the remaining maintenance contracts to ensure the implementation controls are effective. How long will that actually take to be received?
Ms Weigel.
I have received the first draft of that, and the independent person who is undertaking that for us has indicated that we will be receiving the final report early next week.
So it'll be...
It's imminent.
Okay. So it'll be available at the next audit committee meeting.
That's right.
For review.
Yes.
Thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Tui's moved. Thanks, Councillor Rotino, for seconding. Put the motion to you. All those in favour? Motion carried. 5.4.2 is the proposed special council meeting to consider Rural Council's Transformation Program grant funding requirement. Mr CEO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As you will see from the report, officers are requesting a special council meeting to consider a joint project which is commonly known as the Gippsland Shared Services Initiative. There is funds available from the state government under the Transforming Rural Councils program, and this potentially has the opportunity to provide funds to realise returns prior to than what would have otherwise been occurred. So it's an opportunity to apply for funds, and what we're proposing in terms of this special council meeting is to give councillors and the staff enough time to ensure that as much information is made available to the council to make a decision around the Gippsland Shared Services Initiative. It's been something that's been going on for a considerable period of time prior to my commencement. However, we are getting to a point where we need to make a decision, and by putting in this special council meeting so that we can meet the deadline of the 31st of March, which is the funding submission deadline, this will allow council the maximum amount of time to consider all the information. So that is what is being proposed to you today.
Councillor Vitino, do you have a question?
Yes, to the CEO. Mr. CEO, is this a no-go decision meeting? Either a yes commitment or a no?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Councillor, yes it is. It is essentially crunch time for this council to determine whether it wishes to proceed and be part of this process. Hence why we are requesting the special meeting to allow the maximum amount of time to get a briefing from KPMG, who are currently undertaking an update of the business plan and some of the analysis. As well as, am I in your way?
No.
I feel like someone was just doing rabbit ears behind me.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Okay, thank you. So it is crunch time, and it's important that councillors have enough information so as, because this is a significant decision for the council and for our staff.
Councillor Vitino.
Sorry, just a follow-up question, Mr. CEO. Have you seen any of the work from this new consultant? Because I asked the question last time we spoke about this issue in particular. The first consultant was extremely biased, and the way they presented their figures made it look really good for and sort of no downside, and I haven't got the appetite for that sort of report unless it's truly independent and truly challenges the assumptions, the underlying assumptions of what is being tried to be achieved. I'm not interested, but if I get a sense from yourself that it is truly going to be independent and truly challenge the assumptions, then I think I urge all councillors to make sure they're there for this special meeting.
Further questions? We have a recommendation before us. Do we have? Thank you, Councillor Peltz. Thanks, Councillor Roberts. All those in favour? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, item 6, urgent and other business.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to propose a motion. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for and yourself and the CEO for the advocacy work around drought. My motion is in relation to drought, and certainly thank you, Councillor Roberts, for those clarification comments in relation to the federal government grant that was recently a hot topic in social media. The proposed motion is that the Mayor write to the Victorian Minister for Agriculture and Premier Daniel Andrews seeking urgent assistance with rate support for our East Gippsland Shire farming community due to severe drought conditions. This request comes after further feedback from our farming community that this type of assistance is the most equitable assistance we can provide at this time. The farming rate consideration at this time should cover the 2018-19 and 2019-20 rating fiscal years. point 2, that we thank the Minister for Agriculture for her support to date and would like to continue our dialogue with her department as further assistance will be required as drought conditions are monitored and responded to.
Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Thanks, Councillor Roberts. We now have that motion on the table, so do we have any further speakers for it? Yes. No?
So,
Does it say anywhere here how it's going to be distributed, like, you know? Oh yeah, with a rate consideration. Okay, well, give it a consideration, all right. But how is the federal government going to do all this? Just give us money to reduce the farm rate. Is that what it is? Say we reduce the farm rate by or increase the discount up to 30 or 40% or something, calculated on the money that the federal government gives us. What happens?
Councillor Rotino, did you want to clarify?
we certainly are asking for assistance, and it might become clearer if I'm allowed to speak to the rationale. It's been moved and seconded as to why.
So I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour of bringing this motion to the...
Yeah, I think we need to debate whether we should admit it as urgent and other business first.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was doing, so...
Councillors, I'm not too sure we should be admitting this particular motion as urgent and last minute business. Councillors, we recall that we have discussed this matter at great length in councillor discussions over the period of time. I think we're all of the opinion that we wish to support the farmers, but the issue of the rates is something that we've had a lot of angst over. As such, if there's to be, unless there's something new that's changed our decisions and our considerations in the last week or in the last days, I don't believe this to be urgent and other business. The government has been in Norbost of recent assisting farmers and has made government public statements that the government is looking at ways to assist the farming community. I won't attack the rationale. I'm just saying that, and I just don't see how it is urgent and other business. I'd be pleased to hear any argument to show that I'm wrong on that.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Are there any other speakers?
I'd like to say I believe it is urgent on the grounds that it is part of it's a very real issue for our community. It's happening now. How long it's going to happen for, we don't know, but the bottom line is it's something, if we can help our farmers and our community and assist them in getting over this trying period, of course it's urgent and other business, so I'd be happy to debate it on the grounds that it is.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. I'll put the motion...
I'm going to speak against the motion as well.
Okay, Councillor Reeves.
I tend to agree with Councillor Ellis. I think that we have had a long and considered conversation about this, that farms take the emotion out of this, that we understand that there is some difficulty there for many farmers and businesses. And we note, and it has been noted, that we provide effectively a 50% discount on rates to farmers over other business enterprises currently. 50% discount. That's the reality. And I've had many overtures from other commercial business operators that this effectively removes them from the opportunity to have assistance as well. And 55% discount. Yeah, and you would know, you're right there. Thanks, Councillor Peltz. It's very true. And I just don't think it's the right thing. I think the state government is acting. It has provided cash grants to farmers who have discretion to use that for their rates if they wish. And that hasn't been provided for the other business enterprises who have knock-on effects of the drought at the moment. And so I don't think we should be admitting this. I think that we have discussed this as a group. We should acknowledge point 2, that we should thank the Minister and acknowledge the work that has been done, and maybe we should be asking them for an ongoing watching brief of this matter. So I don't think we should be admitting this. I don't support the motion.
Okay, well, I'll put the motion to admit it into urgent other business to the vote. So all of those in favour? 2, 3, 4, 5. Those against? So motion is carried, is now on the table. So are there any further speakers to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The East Gippsland Shire Council is deeply concerned about the impact that this extended dry spell is having on our farming enterprises, our communities, our families and associated businesses. I think Councillor Pell's said earlier that she'd been speaking to some 80-year-old farmers who have never seen these sorts of conditions before in their life, so that's concerning us. We don't know when it's going to potentially end. We acknowledge that the state and Commonwealth governments have provided funds to support individual farmers and communities. However, Council continues to hear from our community. It's our community that's asking for relief around rates, and that would provide them with cash injection needed to free up cash for them to reinvest in their farms. The East Gippsland Drought Reference Groups reiterated this view just this week in its latest meeting, and this would represent a tangible freeing up of funds to redirect into maintaining farm operations, injecting much needed money into the local economies. East Gippsland Shire Council recently collected approximately $5 million in farm rates, and the feedback continually from our community, as I said earlier, suggests that the hoops that people must go through to access other various assistance often prevents them from accessing that support. Rate relief provides a quick and easy administered way of providing that support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tino. Speakers against?
I'd like to speak against it, Madam Mayor. We're rather not unprepared because we didn't expect to be in this position of having to debate this matter. This is a very difficult matter to debate because anyone who opposes it will be seen most likely as being quite miserable, and that's not why why I'm not opposing it. It's not a part of being miserable. Rates are a middle line or baseline costing for any business. Farming is a business, unless someone can show me it's not. I have great empathy for the farmers and the difficulties of they are facing in drought. And as a member of the community, I am one to support anyone that's having difficulty. The farming community are being well supported by the state government. They are supported by the federal government. There's lots of little packages going out to assist them in schooling packages, clothing packages, holiday packages, school equipment packages, counselling, a whole series of things. This rate relief is a push from a lobby group coming through and impacting upon our clear decision making. I get lobbied by retailers as an example as how unfair it is that they have to pay such high rates when their businesses are suffering. So I can't see why we can't apply a rate relief to the retailers of East Gippsland who are suffering, strip shoppers, all those sorts of different small businesses that are impacted, people who service the agricultural community who are impacted, they also should also be given rate relief. It's not just one sector of the community. The other issues we have to look at from an organisation is management, and that is what do we replace by not collecting the rates? What services do we hold back on? What employment do we take away from employees? What negative impact does the removal of rate monies from our local community have on our wider community? This is a complex question. It's not just a simple good idea to help people who are in need. We have empathy for the farmers, but I see that this is not a thing. We have mechanism within the system of council to assist any farmer that is having difficulty with their rates, whether it's deferment of payment, reduction on interest costs, removal of any potential penalties associated with it, provision and direction to counselling. This is a really difficult thing, and we're not being honest. I accept the other points as Councillor Rees mentioned, where was it, on point 2, thanking the Minister and encouraging her, and this is what we should be doing. This motion should be about encouraging the state governments and federal governments to provide more laissez and more assistance to the farmers. This is, we're doing our bit, and I just believe that pushing it into the rates is a negative reaction, it's the emotive reaction coming from a lobby group that's inappropriately influencing this particular discussion. I urge councillors not to support this concept of the word rate, and I did mention that to Councillor Rotino earlier, that this is a big difficulty for us all. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor. Speakers for?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd really like to not speak for or against, but at the issue, if that's possible. You know, I've always been on about trying to reduce the rates for everybody, but how far can you go? Do we need this special, this unusual, well, it's not unusual to have droughts in this country, but to use this circumstance for that? But as Councillor Ellis says, can we just do this? If we just do it for the farmers and say, okay, we're going to drop your, you know, increase it to 60 or 70% or whatever that might be, that's going to obviously upset the other ratepayers. They're going to say, well, why can't we? Because we're getting affected by the drought too, because the farmers aren't buying our stuff. And then the grocer's the same, and everybody's in the same boat. So how do we get around that? You see, and we claim we need this much money it's about half of what our budget is, comes from the rates, and we claim that we need this money to run the show. So I would sort of have to vote against this in a way and try and think around it some better way of getting at this. Are we going to cut our staff down? What are our staff members going to say? All right, half a dozen of you people have got to go because we just can't afford to keep you. And, well, that's my take on it anyway, and I don't think I can say any more than that. So, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Peltz?
Yes, I'd just like to support Councillor Rotino's comments and stating by actually advocating for this reduction in rates for the farmers, the comment that he made, and I think, well, it's economically viable that there would be more funding for the farmers to be paying their bills, which economically it has a secondary effect to flow on to the people who are in the businesses serving the farming industry, which means indirectly they do get a kickback from it. So I think economically it actually does have sound merit. Whilst it sounds like we're giving them opportunity, it's also economically stimulating for our region. And whilst I would like to see a more equal thought for the industrial people, because they do bear the burden of additional rate costs by 45% on top of the normal rate, which is something that we use as an economic stimulus for our region. I do believe by giving the farmers this kickback that the economic stimulus is actually received at the business point too. So I think it's a double-edged thing, and I can actually accept the rationale of that to be supporting this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Councillor Reeves?
So I'll speak against the motion and continue the discussion that, look, I believe that rate relief is neither quick nor easy, and it's certainly not equitable. Respectfully disagreeing with you, Councillor Rotino. It won't be something you can administer almost immediately, and in fact it could be by the time the drought is over or businesses are on their recovery that this might flow on to the benefit of the farmers. The administration will be not easy. It will be complex and it will be messy. There's no doubt about it. And as I mentioned earlier, it will be inequitable. And as Councillor Buckley so eloquently mentioned, it doesn't adequately address all people, all business enterprises that are affected by the drought. And the VFF should be advocating for the farmers. That's their role. And they should be a pressure group, and we should listen to all pressure groups but not be reactive to them all. Otherwise we'll have Vecchi here advocating for industry and business, and should we be reacting to them and providing rate relief to every business up and down the high street, every carpenter, every chippy, everybody who feels that they deserve rate relief. Rates are a fixed business cost. It's a slippery path to go down for governments to be subsidising fixed business costs. We don't provide support for their loans, for their equipment, their businesses, their trucks or their mortgages, and rates are a fixed business cost. It is a very difficult area to go down, and I would urge against that. I've also considered that why don't banks, who are also one of the larger organisations involved in farmers, play a part, and some do. And I know that some of the big four do, by request, allow farmers to extend payments and to perhaps apply for interest rate reduction, just as farmers can do to us if they're struggling with their rates. They can approach us and they can ask for some consideration, they can ask for deferred payments, they can ask for plans, and that's the sort of thing, that's the space that we occupy, councillors, not providing fixed business cost subsidies. So this is not an appropriate thing, a space to be going into. I can't support it, and I urge you not to as well.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Councillor White.
Sorry for stepping out for a bit, so I'm just a little bit behind here, but I'd just like to say something about assistance that has been given for other things in other areas, and I would just like to say I think we lost 720 jobs when Hazelwood was closed. And I'd like to perhaps ask somebody who might know how many hundreds of millions of dollars was injected into the Latrobe Valley for that circumstance. So perhaps to apportion it to so many jobs that we've lost in our area with very little assistance coming our way. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to speak to the motion just to clarify a few points that were raised before, that this isn't a lobby group. This is a conversation that every farmer is having with anyone and everyone, or certainly at the drought reference group, the events that are being held, farm visits. The consistent message from farmers is that rate relief is the most equitable way to assist farmers and provide some cash release, as Councillor Peltz referred to. We've had many discussions around the table over the last few weeks, and everyone's in agreement that Council simply could not cover rate relief from us. So that's why, by moving this motion, that we're asking the state to provide that rate relief to ensure that we wouldn't have to cut services or cut employees, as Councillor Buckley referred to. So I fully support this motion and ask you to support it also. Councillor Rotino. Sorry.
If we vote in favour of this, it means the overview of it is it's not going to affect us as far as reducing our rates go. Is that what you're trying to tell me, that you're going to ask the Minister
Yes.
to make good the shortfall?
Yes.
We're asking the Minister to fund.
That didn't seem to be clearly put here.
It doesn't state that, but that was what the intention was.
Well, in that case, if we're just simply asking the Minister to make good the shortfall, I'd most certainly support it.
Yes, it says, write to the Minister for Agriculture and Premier seeking urgent assistance with rate support. Okay. So we're asking them to support
And
us.
it's not going to put us in a position where we've
No.
got to put people off.
No.
Okay,
just-
well, I'm glad you've clarified that.
Before Councillor Rotino's right of reply, Mr. CEO, can you just clarify that the motion is clear and that you know, if this motion was carried, that you know we are clear on what we're asking myself to write to.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, I believe it is seeking support from the state. If, in fact, as been suggested, that council were to provide that rate relief, we wouldn't need to write to the minister. We have that capacity for council to make a resolution to that effect. The purpose, I understand, of this is to seek that essentially the rate support. So essentially, instead of us paying for any rate reduction or rate payment in lieu of, that in fact the state would do that. So if I believe, Madam Mayor, if it is not clear to some councillors, then we should potentially adjust it to ensure that it does actually is clear.
So if I may, Madam Mayor, just seek clarification. What we're asking for is a one-off grant of $5 million to cover the lost rate income from farmers, from the state government. $5 million, so one-off grant. And that would be then followed quickly by 39 other rural councils asking the same question if we were successful.
I'd like to see the whole rate tax. It's just a tax on a guess anyway. I'd like to see it replaced by direct payments of GST revenues to the shires to make up the shortfall. I know that's a long call, but that's what I'd like to see. But for this particular issue, I will support your motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Rotino.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank all councillors for their contribution in this debate. Certainly, this motion, we've been workshopping this as a potential solution, so it's not quite right that we weren't prepared for this. I actually circulated this motion around to the councillor group. I'd like to reiterate what the Madam Mayor has said. This isn't a lobby group, this is our community. This is our farming community that's asking for it. If you look across at New South Wales, they, and I don't like to do comparisons, but they've blown up the whole subsidy support for fodder, freight support. You know, our farmers would love to get that freight support to feed their livestock and that, but that's off the table. That's totally off the table because all that's done is driven up those costs around fodder. The comments around cutting back services, well, we're not actually cutting our rates. We're asking the state government to provide that rate money. In relation to Councillor Buckley talking about rating strategies, I don't disagree, but this is not that debate. That debate can be held when we have our rating strategy discussions. Again, thank Councillor Reeves for his input, and yeah, we're hearing from our community that this is the most equitable way to get money back into their coffers so they can buy fodder, so they can spend money locally. And certainly the advocacy part is important, and I take that note on board. I'll just leave it at that. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Rotino. We have a motion before you, so all those in favour? All those against? Motion carried 7-2. Thank you. Any other urgent and other business? Councillor Peltz, 2 more items?
I have 2, thanks,
sure.
Madam Mayor. I think all councillors have received the other additional ones. I guess the one that I would like to move first is the one in regards to support of the timber industry. I request that the Mayor write to the Victorian State Government Minister for Resources, the Honourable Jacqueline Sims, MLC, seeking an urgent assurance of certainty of the hardwood timber supply provided through the regional forestry agreements or equivalent to maintain sawmill supply volumes and ensure employment security of hardwood timber workers and their families in the East Gippsland region. Now, I briefly spoke with regards to this earlier in my report, in my councillor report, and I just wanted to talk to it further, but now my computer's decided to have a little snoozy, so I'll just bring it back up. I hereby give notice to move as a formal resolution of the East Gippsland Shire Council that the Mayor write to the Minister and seek an urgent assurance that certainty of the hardwood timber supplies provided through the RFAs or equivalent to the hardwood timber workers and formal commitments to sawmill supply volumes of the East Gippsland region. The timber industry is a sustainable and critical component of the East Gippsland community with, I said 85% and they said 75%, so we'll go 80% of the region being vegetated with natural hardwood forests. The economic value of the harvesting process...
Councillor Peltz, can we just see if this will be accepted into...
Sorry,
urgent another. So do we have a... That's okay. A seconder. Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Okay. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Okay. It's now on the table. Please carry on, Councillor Peltz.
Blee blah, blee blah. I'll bring it back to the table. With what I've said, the timber industry is a sustainable and critical component of the East Gippsland community, with 80% of the region being vegetated with natural hardwood forests. The economic value of the harvesting process in the region is greatly respected and valued. This resource is in line with the protection of greatly valued jobs in our region and the East Gippsland Shire's timber encouragement policy adopted 4 years ago. The basis of this correspondence is in regards to the planning of the Emerald Link track, which is a Labor Party pre-election promise announced late last year before the elections. They propose to make a walking track, a 120-kilometre walking track called the C2 Summit Trail, which is scheduled for our region from the Errinundra Plateau to Cape Conran. And whilst we encourage economic tourism development in our region, we believe it should be integrated and respectful of the hardwood timber industry workplace. So instead of getting rid of the coops that are actually coming up and just putting them all into national forests, we believe the industry should be able to work hand in hand with eco-tourism propositions. We encourage the current state government to come up with a plan where there are no net losses to the timber industry jobs nor harvesting areas in volume and productivity. Any jobs lost in the timber industry is definitely unacceptable to the East Gippsland Shire. We've had enough. That's my proposition.
Thank you. Councillor Reeves, did you wish to speak?
Oh, look, Councillor Peltz has raised a great issue here, and it's something that many of us have been grappling with, those who have had communication with our timber industry operators and enterprises around the certainty of supply. It's very frustrating. It's very hard for those businesses to make long-term plans and invest in the important expensive plant and machinery and staff training and operator skills. So we need that certainty of supply as well. In regard to the Summit to Sea Emerald Link, I think there was how many millions? Several $1 million was allocated as a state government election promise to do some investigation work, and I hope that we can see that come to reality and work harmoniously with the timber industry, because that hopefully runs through some of the national park areas, and there's no doubt that that's an emerging and great possible industry for us. And I've had a number of people contact me about the great potential of that to link up with one day the great Wilderness Coast Walk and so on, that we all know could be one day our Milford soundtrack of the southeast of Australia.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. Speakers against?
Well, I'm speaking out again, and would like to ask Councillor Peltz, what do they mean by reserve areas? I'll tell you why I ask this. Where Collins had a mill, it was closed down before the war because they cut out their patch on Mount Elizabeth. Well, that's a fair-sized patch because it ran a mill for quite some years. It's, you know, all mountain ash, no alpine ash. It's just purely mountain ash. And it's about, what, 80, 90 years when it gets to the perfect stage. And, yeah, and we kept a close eye on that during the times of my job flying the Sky Grinder. And we were sort of half hoping that the bushfires wouldn't swallow it up. And they got quite close to it on a couple of occasions, and that bush survived. That stand survived, because if you get a wildfire through a stand of alpine or mountain ash, it can kill the whole lot. You know, it's not like this lower scoria stuff where it'll coppice and survive. And my question to you is, I've noticed on some of these charts, and I hope it hasn't been changed in recent times, but that patch was marked as a reserve. Well, what does a reserve mean? Is it reserved until a bushfire gets to it, or is it reserved for in perpetuity, or what's the story? Because you know, I think it's that important. It's close to Bairnsdale. It's close to, relatively close to where the couple of mills are, big mills, and you know, I think those sort of places are really worth a visit, and I will do it privately. And but can you tell me that? What does the reserve mean when they say that?
Councillor Buckley, I know you're directing your question at me, and you're talking about a section that I'm unfamiliar with, and I won't presume to know, and I'll take that on notice. But the bottom line is, often the timber industry will reserve forests for ecological reasons, or you know, later, you know, preservation, or till a certain time. But all I know is the Errinundra is an area that the Gulanguk community and the environmentalists have been after to try and lock up for a long time. It has substantial timber coops in there, which our the Victorian Vic Forest has had compliance to be able to harvest. And a lot of the timber workers have just late last year been issued 5-year contracts, 5-year jobs security to harvest this timber, and now it's coming to the stage where it's actually being offered to, they're about to start on it, and the environmentalists have actually now put the it back on the table to stay away from, because they're talking about locking it up and making the Errinundra track. And we feel that it's unfair. Anything that they've actually put in as a reserve, there's a stipulation in the forestry agreements that if it's put into reserve, there needs to be alternative reservations unreserved, taken out of reserve, for the timber industry to be able to harvest. So whilst one is taken away, the other one should be given back, and they're never given back, they're only ever taken away. So they're actually diminishing the timber harvesting area, which is actually 0.3 of 1% of the total timber that is able to be harvested. So it's actually very minuscule compared with the timber and the ecology of the region that we have out there, and they're wanting the whole lot, basically. So we need to look at this as do we secure economic viable jobs in the region versus a walking track that's locked up for forever, basically, in regards to you know, people wanting to come out to the bush and just walk around it and have no asset value back into our community, or a smaller asset value than what actually is there now, is what I'm talking about. I think. No, but anyway, we'll go on with the forest person. In a more opportune time. No worries. And thank you for your input, and I will support you on that motion.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? No? I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Motion carried unanimously. And Councillor Peltz, your last item.
Oh yes, now this is very relevant to the Mallacoota community. We've come up... Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, Peltz. Reeves.
Do you want to just tell the gallery?
The motion that I've proposed is that the Mayor personally deliver a letter to the Minister for Environment and Energy, Environment and Climate Change, the Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio MP, in regards to reviewing the Catchment Management Authority guidelines for estuary opening that are currently triggering when the water level reaches 1.5 metres. So that's what we're putting on the table.
Okay, and we've got
Councillor Peltz, can I just clarify that this is for Mallacoota estuary opening, not so that should refer to Mallacoota estuary opening. Yep.
We can add that. Mallacoota.
Okay. So, Councillor Reeves, you've seconded the item to be admitted?
Yes.
Oh, the amendment.
The amended proposed motion.
I'm second question.
What other question?
About whether it should be just Mallacoota or looking at the policy more broadly.
Ms Nelson, can you please clarify whether we do need to specifically ask for Mallacoota, or are we looking at the policy more broadly?
I think my recommendation would be that we seek a review of the guidelines more broadly, because this is not an issue just that happens at Mallacoota. Lake Tyers Beach is another example that when the estuary, Bem River, when the estuary is closed, you know, it has impacts all the way back up to now, and I think it would be I think that if we're going to review it, then we should review all of them.
Okay.
In which case, then it probably shouldn't reference a water level, because the water levels will be different at each estuary, the trigger points.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that clarification, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Toohey, did you have a...
Ms Nelson, would that, in your opinion, would that slow down the reason for going about this, which is to get this opened here? That's the thing that concerns me. If we do it more broadly, that I know in previous instances asking government departments, the general idea is about 2 years to get anything done, and we certainly don't want it to take that long. So my question is, will it affect if we ask the broader question, or should we be specific in this instance, and then perhaps add a second question in regards to revising all of the trigger points as a secondary question?
Yeah, that is a really good point, given the pressures here, absolutely. So maybe, sorry, I didn't have a chance to analyse this beforehand, but maybe it is a two-part thing. Yeah, because the priority right now, the immediate priority is Mallacoota, so absolutely understand that. But so maybe the clause does stay as it was with the word Mallacoota in there, and that there's a second part, which is to more generally have a look at a review of the guidelines for the other areas on the same basis. It just happens to be a pressure point here.
Yep. Is that okay?
Okay, so we need to vote on it to bring it into urgent and other. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So motion is carried 8-1. Well, you both had your hand up. Ben and John did. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So 8-1.
Okay, so do we have any further speakers to the motion? Oh, speak. Yes, please speak to the rationale.
I hereby move on behalf of my fellow councillors, in response to the viability of the Mallacoota community, that the Mayor personally deliver a letter to the Minister of Environment, hence giving opportunity for better discussion, the Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio MP, in regards to reviewing the CMA guidelines for estuary opening that are currently triggered when the water level reaches 1.5 metres. The rationale behind it is currently there is a big inundation issue of the foreshore of Mallacoota Inlet, which is currently at 0.9 of a metre. because the entrance is closed. The entrance has been closed for 3 months now, as we heard, due to little rain in the catchment and no natural flushing out of the natural lake system. As a result, the water has raised above the port and the boat jetties, so they cannot be used and are being severely damaged and weakened. Tourism is being compromised because of the jetties being underwater, and people are staying away from the Mallacoota region because of this issue. The water is up and over the road and is no doubt causing severe damage and washout to our infrastructure. We believe the CEMA guidelines are not respectful to community assets and infrastructure, and that that your policy is aiding excessive expense to taxpayers and ratepayers in the regards to repairs when the water finally subsides. 2 boat hire businesses in the township have had to close for many days on end as they are unable to launch their vessels safely, leading to loss of income and economic hardship. Less fishermen venturing out as the water is stagnant due to loss of oxygen in the water and not wanting to be able to go out and fish. According to the locals, in the history of the inlet, from what I gathered last night, it has never opened under, the estuary has never opened under natural causes and has been assisted 5 times for most beneficial outcome to the community. We request that the Minister individually review the practicality of the current guidelines and take our concerns into consideration, and immediately move to manually open the inlet to allow freshwater circulation, ecological stimulus and better health for the Mallacoota Inlet, aiding in the economic stimulus to the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. Further speakers? Councillor Rees?
Thanks for bringing that to everybody's attention, Councillor Peltz. It's a really valuable thing, and I've lived here when the water has been backed up, and it's really inconvenient. And I think, Ms Nelson, your addenda over here to the motion is quite valuable, so that's what's been added there. So specifically to Mallacoota, the trigger being at 1.5 metres, but the other estuaries being looking at the current estuary opening guidelines. I was thinking of triggers, but guidelines, because it's quite complex around rainfall, tidal, wind, all of these things that are the complexities of nature that conspire at the moment. So yeah, thanks, that's great. I'm happy with that.
Thank you. Speakers against?
The one and only, I guess, but the reality is this. The management of estuaries and estuarine waters has been well managed by the state of Victoria for probably more than 100 years in many ways. In the present time, we've received briefings at Council based on reports from the experts in the management of this. Knee-jerk reactions to the release of waters doesn't proactively improve the aquatic environment. It doesn't move the sands away as rapidly as you'd like, and often it's not human interference, uneducated in human interference with the breaking over of estuaries causes more ecological damage than it prevents. This is not an area of expertise for local government. It's not something we know about. The work is being handled right now as we speak by Parks Victoria, a government authority, in conjunction with experts, both academic and hands-on, in terms of the management of the Mallacoota estuary, as well as the ones at Timboom, all the way through to now and further west. For us to start trying to manage their work is like us going to another scientific government body and telling them, or them coming from another body and coming to local government and telling us how to do our business. It's a recognised and discussed issue in this area here at the moment, but there seems to be a lot of cool heads about the matter, as well as a few other words, you know, with a bit of colour in them. To be suggesting to our partner groups in the area that they're not competently addressing the issue is, I think, a bit mischievous, and I really just can't support it. I can understand some of the frustrations with the water coming up, but the reality is it's a natural occurrence, and we could perhaps do more by encouraging people, because this is a public statement, a conversation we're having, so this will be discussed in other places, and we could be responsible for those being far more irresponsible and opening the entrance themselves to the detriment of the estuary. So please really think about this matter in another aspect. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Toohey.
I'd like to speak for the motion. As Councillor Ellis pointed out, it's not our role to manage waterways, but it is, however, our role to advocate on behalf of our community to situations that our community believes that they face. We're not actually asking them or telling them what we want them to do. What we're asking them to do is to review the height and to potentially do something in regards to allowing the opening, and I do see that as our role, and that's why I'm more than happy to vote for this proposal.
If I may, I don't want to I haven't the right to refute, but I should let councillors know that some years ago, in the recent years, there was a review of estuarine openings. So just so you know that happened. So it's not, we won't be getting something new. Yep.
Thank you. Speakers against? Speakers for? Councillor Rotino?
Just briefly, Madam Mayor, reiterating Councillor Toohey's comments, but also where it impacts us and where we do need to take a lead and support our community is it's impacting our assets. Nothing more, nothing less. Thank you.
Any further speakers? Councillor? No? Sure. Councillor White?
Actually, Councillor Ellis just said that there had been a review recently, but I was actually going to point out that in terms of reviews on how water has shifted around this country, there's one recently came to mind, which was all the fish that died up in the Darling River system, and there was no need for that to happen, but legislation told those people to release X amount of water for South Australia. I think their lake's called the Menindee Lakes or something. Oh, yeah. It's legislation said they had to release it, yet they caused all those fish to die, and the person who was interviewed, who was a water person, said that actually that had not been reviewed for 70 years. It was just what they did. So, but of course Councillor Ellis has said that we've had a recent review, so that was all that I was going to say. It may not have been done for some time.
Thank you. Councillor Peltz, right of reply?
Yes, I'd just like to say in regards to the review, if it has happened, I'm not sure whether Council was consulted with regards to the impact of the new regulations, but we all know that inundation is at 0.8 of a metre, which is a fair method of thumb, which is widely spoken about in the planning industry. And for 1.5 metres, whilst there's a tidal aspect, I'd like to say we're finding at 0.9, which the inlet actually is now, we're seeing severe asset degradation and damage to community assets, which are costly to replace. We heard from one of the local community members today that the jetty's underwater, and it has been for several months. They're wanting us to revoke jetty licences, so that's an economic impact to council. And also under all the, as the jetties are underwater, they're also deteriorating, which he declared, and I guess we'll get our maintenance people to have a look at those in regards to that. But the bottom line is it is a very real cost to our community and to our council as a whole. So respectfully, I would urge you to support this recommendation, because I think it is actually the right thing to do in regards to the Mallacoota community and in regards to East Gippsland Shire councillor assets. So with that stated, that's my proposition.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. I'll put the motion to you. All those in favour? All those against? Motion carried 8-1. Thank you. Okay, we will now move into confidential business. Can I have a councillor?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, in accordance with Section 77(2)(c) of the Local Government Act 1989, where are we?
Funny what they got here. On 8th of February.
It's not the usual clause we read out.
Just while we find the wording, we're just moving into confidential business to discuss a contractual matter, and so we'll do this in camera and then we'll come back out and make the decision in public. So I think you'll be asked to just vacate the room while we discuss that after we've read the motion.
Is that the right wording? Where are we reading? What page? Yeah, it says...
Because it's the wrong thing.
Ah. Can we just have Councillor move that we move into a closed session? Yep. Councillor Roberts, seconded Councillor Attino.
Do you want us to read
all those in favour?
We're supposed to read it out.
Mr Buckley, are you voting to move into camera?
You're a Mr now.
Councillor Buckley. Councillor Buckley, we've just voted to move into camera. So, yes, thank you. That's okay. Motion is carried. Thank you.